And I also think, Greg, that one of the ways we know that our counseling or our journey is changing who we are is our beliefs about ourselves and others are changing as well. There's no amount of everybody else telling us that, you need to be celebrated. We're celebrating. I mean, if we still walk around and we can't change that inner belief for ourselves about our own worthiness or that God loves us or others do love us, can't always celebrate us exactly how we would like, we'll never be able to take in what people want to give us. Mm-hmm. And so it can be frustrating for others to want to give us things, but if we don't believe in some of these things ourselves, it's really hard. It just it's like a water off the duck's back.
Right. Welcome to the Faithful and True podcast. We're happy to be with you today with Dr. Greg Miller and with Debbie Laaser. And if you saw our last podcast, we had promised that we'd come back and talk about some of the important yearly anniversaries, birthdays, things like this, and what are the best strategies in approaching these dates?
Absolutely. Well, and we talked about this idea of starting the new year, anticipating the new year, and recognizing that throughout the new year there will be events that even now you may have some concern about or questions about how to navigate. And this may be specifically for couples that are early in their recovery. There's still a lot of difficulty and pain. Or what may be true is, it may be that you've been in recovery for a while, but there's a new experience that's coming up. Maybe this is the first time that you're going to a wedding, or maybe your child is graduating for the first time. And so you're kind of wondering how you're going to navigate that, given the experiences that you've had in the last couple of years or recently. And we're going to start with birthdays. How do we celebrate and acknowledge birthdays with our spouse in the context of this awareness of betrayal?
Mm-hmm. I have some thoughts about this because we talk about this a fair amount with women and in our groups, mm-hmm. And mainly because oftentimes they're very painful. And I've decided that in listening to wives, they become painful when their expectations of that day are for other people to do things for them so that they give them the joy and celebrate them in the way they feel loved. Mm-hmm. I think when we live out of our expectations for other people to do things, we can really get into trouble quickly. Mm-hmm. And so we end up talking about how they can create for themselves a celebration of their day, first and foremost, that would include some things that they would love. And it may be suggesting people they want to be with. I'd love to go out to dinner with these friends, or I'd love to have a family get together, or maybe I'd really love just a quiet weekend with you up in some resort area. But being intentional about what, again, you like and need is a great way to start thinking about your birthday, so that others can simply add on to that. And no matter what anyone else does, if you start out with thinking about your needs and go after those for yourself, the other stuff just becomes icing on the cake, so to speak. Well, and you never end up disappointed in your day because you have already filled it up with things that bless yourself.
Absolutely. And one of the things that may be true is that for a lot of people who are listening, the idea of identifying their needs and desires is mm-hmm. a foreign concept, especially mm-hmm. around birthdays. Mm-hmm. And it may be that you grew up in a home where birthdays really weren't acknowledged and weren't celebrated, or maybe you grew up in a home where birthdays were a big deal, but it was done by somebody else for you. And so to really get specific about this is what would be meaningful for you, that may even be the first step because you've never done that before. We recently were able to celebrate my dad's 90th birthday. We all gathered in Texas in order to make that happen. And there were so many times where he said some variation of, I've never had this experience. I've never been celebrated like this. I've never had a party like this. And I don't think he was exaggerating. I don't think in the season he grew up that was something that his family was able to do or did often. It wasn't necessarily a big part of the way that we celebrated. And so here he was, 90 years old, and maybe for the first time having a big birthday party where the focus was just on him. And I could see how that experience really nurtured his soul. And he was great about telling us some of the things he wanted, the people he wanted there, the invitations that we could send. And so it was that combination of him learning something new, of asking for his needs and desires, us really as his kids and his in-laws challenging him to say, hey, what would be meaningful for you? Us knowing him well enough to get some of his favorite stuff. But for those of you that are listening that are going, this is new to me, I've never really done this, to let that just be true, and this is something that you can learn about yourself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, first and foremost, if we work personally on also our own belovedness with God, that in a perfect world, if we're living out of that foundation for ourselves, ideally the day can be whatever it is, and we still know that truth.
Right.
And, I know today, now that Mark has passed away, some of these days for me are much quieter. My kids are all over the place. It doesn't often mean that I'm with family a lot. And I have to say that I can still think about things that make those days special for myself and have them still be really lovely days. And that would be our hope for our clients as well. I do know I just hear a lot of disappointment when a wife hasn't done this, or the kids didn't send that, or whatever else didn't happen. Then there was nothing left because they hadn't thought a lot about what they wanted to do for themselves.
One of the skills that I had to learn was letting my community know that it was my birthday. And it feels awkward, but that was one of the things I learned in my group experience was if I had a need or a desire, then I couldn't expect people to know it, and I couldn't expect them to know when my birthday was. So I would send out information that said, hey, this is my birthday tomorrow, and this is what I would like from you, from my community. I would like a word of encouragement, or I'd like a word of affirmation. And my community is great. They always did it, and they were so appreciative that I was asking for what I needed. And so especially for those of you that are learning about community, and this isn't just about your family, but you can ask your community for what you need. You can say, hey, can we all go out and eat and get something after group because it's my birthday and I would love to celebrate with y'all. But that's one of the ways to kind of change the dynamic where in a very healthy, wise place, you're asking for your need and you're letting your community and your family to be able to support you and meet that need.
So that could be a really big problem for a lot of our clients. And I think you said it earlier. It's because one of the things we notice is that they often really struggle with knowing what they need. And maybe they haven't been encouraged to think that way, or that it's selfish to think about what I need or even to ask for what I need. So I think it's changing maybe that core belief that, in our opinion, it's a good thing to be able to state what you need, and it's helpful for other people to know that too, because they'd like to be able to serve you with your needs if possible. But that's a first step. I think a second one is being able to lavish on yourself a little bit. It becomes really hard when you feel like whatever money or time or whatever goes to everybody else and not you, because that would be selfish. It would be really hard to ask for some things you would like for your birthday.
Absolutely.
And so,
But I do accept Best Buy gift cards.
Yeah,
One of the things that my dad was often saying about this was, I don't deserve this.
that's what I mean.
I don't deserve this. And we're
Right.
going, you're 90 years old. We love you. We want to do this for you. Of course you deserve this. But it was interesting how in that way, some of his core beliefs were being exposed. And that's one of the things to pay attention to. That's why we process these things in community or with our therapist, is because if we really go after it, we can begin to discover some of the things that we believe about ourselves, about our needs, our desires, our self-worth, our worthiness to be in community or to be lavished upon, or any of those types of things.
Yeah.
And many times we avoid it because it does make us uncomfortable, and yet we have to be uncomfortable in order to change. And one of the things that I think can be helpful is if we have a core belief, it's important that we check it out with the other people in our lives. And so to be able to say to our community, there's a part of me that doesn't believe I deserve to be acknowledged on my birthday, and I just want to check that out. Do you believe that about me? And again, it feels strange to have that clear of a conversation, but we're trying to do it differently. And we often say one of the ways that you can know your recovery is working is that you are doing things that make you uncomfortable and you're seeking to do things differently.
And I also think, Greg, that one of the ways we know that our counseling or our journey is changing who we are is our beliefs about ourselves and others are changing as well. There's no amount of everybody else telling us that, you need to be celebrated. We're celebrating. I mean, if we still walk around and we can't change that inner belief for ourselves about our own worthiness or that God loves us or others do love us, can't always celebrate us exactly how we would like, we'll never be able to take in what people want to give us. And so it can be frustrating for others to want to give us things, but if we don't believe in some of these things ourselves, it's really hard. It just it's like a water off the duck's back,
Well, one of the things also is if I'm struggling to receive things, part of the question to ask is what causes me to believe this? Or how do I benefit by believing I don't deserve these things? And instead of it being about your shame, let it be about your curiosity. I'm just kind of curious. Why wouldn't I believe that I deserve good things? While we're talking about birthdays, one of the things that comes up in some of the relationships and working with men is for those men who have had affairs and their wife is aware that they had given their affair partner gifts, suddenly gifts become incredibly painful and complicated. And people navigate it differently. How do we kind of help people understand that just because gifts have become difficult and painful, at some point we may be able to receive gifts again? Maybe right now we can't, but maybe down the road we can.
Well, I think that's that work that I would help wives do about accepting what her needs are for today. And if for today gifts are too triggering, then think about something else that's meaningful to you. Maybe it's time with you. Maybe it's taking you someplace new that he's never been and you've never been. It can be a lot of different things. But I think also as she moves along in her journey, it's the overriding of some of the old things that have happened with new experiences that will allow her to take in even some of the things that happened before with others that she can now take in for herself. But time is one of the great healers for that, and also overriding with new experiences is one of the things that pushes those hard memories further and further down in our memory banks so that we live more with some of the current things that are happening.
And one of the things I would also say is, again, give yourself permission to be where you are. And so maybe last year you were able to receive gifts, and this year you're not in a place to receive gifts, and so you can just name that. And it actually doesn't necessarily mean you're taking a step backwards. This may be your journey forward, but it's not helpful to receive gifts that really you're not comfortable with and pretend that you are because you think that's what you're supposed to do. One of the things that we're working on with our couples is that they're able to be honest with where they are in that moment about what is going on, and that can be awkward and difficult, but again, that's a way of doing it differently.
It reminds me a little bit too, Greg, of wives, for instance, that don't want to hear their husbands say, "I love you." And that can be really hard for, a husband who's in recovery and wants to make amends and wants to show his wife that he is sorrowful for what happened. He wants to stay in the relationship, and she refuses to listen to those words. In some ways, it's good that she's able to name her needs for now. I would guess that it isn't going to be forever. And, I talk with wives about that. But for him, it is kind of the natural and logical consequence to what happened. And ideally, it would be for him to accept that and acknowledge it and not try to keep pushing through it and giving it to her, even though she doesn't want to hear it. And that in itself speaks for his integrity, I think, to let go of something he wants to give, but she's not ready to receive.
Absolutely. Well, and it's that idea of one of the best gifts that we can give our spouse is honoring their boundaries. And so if a wife says, "I don't want a gift this year," instead of kind of doing a workaround and thinking, "Well, I really think she would like this," you just honor that. And then maybe she gets upset because she didn't get a gift, even though she requested that, and that maybe that's something she can learn about actually she is in a place where she once gives. But it's about, if there's a request, then we're going to honor that. If she's asked, don't tell me that you love me, that we're not going to push that boundary, like you said, for our agenda. We let our spouse identify what their needs are, and if something changes, they communicate that with us.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I've noticed, Greg, is out in Target and everywhere, all the Valentines are
That
out.
is a great
Actually,
segue.
they came out the day after New Year's.
That's
I
right,
noticed
right?
they are right on the mark there at those stores. So Valentine's is a very hard day for most couples to work through.
Right. And part of it is anniversaries are private. And yes, we share our anniversary with other people, but that can be just the two of us, we are aware of this and we're choosing to do it differently. Valentine's Day is that day that screams to everyone, this is the day where you're supposed to express your love. This is the day where we're supposed to celebrate your relationship and your coupleship. And so there can be this additional cultural pressure that we're supposed to, on this day, have everything together. And the reality is, on this particular day, we may not. So any thoughts or suggestions how a couple can even move through Target in January if they're in a difficult place and navigate the triggers that may occur?
Again, I think it's about being intentional, and it's about speaking truths as best as you can, because that's what we're learning and teaching couples to do, is to be brutally honest with each other. And so it might just be, it's really hard to see all these hearts, and I long to celebrate this day and have it be meaningful, but right now I don't think I can. So being intentional doesn't mean that you need to hurt your spouse by your words or your actions. It just means naming, again, your limitations, as you say, and maybe your hopes and dreams for maybe in a year or two it will be different. I'm sure hoping so, and I long to be able to celebrate you as my sweetheart at some point, but I just can't do that right now.
And it's okay to like we said in a previous podcast when we were talking about anniversaries, it's okay if y'all are in different places. So to be able to say, I hear that you're not able to give me a card, would you be open to me giving you a card? And then your spouse gets to say yes or no to that. That clarity is going to be helpful for both of you, because sometimes that's where miscommunication occurs, where the spouse, in this case the wife, may say, I'm not able to give you a card, and her desire would be to receive one, but that's never clarified. So he hears we're not doing cards this year, or we're not doing gifts this year. And sometimes if I have a desire to give a gift or a card, I can just ask specifically, would you be okay if I did that? And then our spouse gets to say yes or no to that. One other complexity that we can acknowledge is, for many couples, an anniversary that they remember is when that full disclosure or the explosion or the information first came out. And that can be a very difficult, painful day. It becomes more challenging when that day is associated with a holiday. And I've heard stories where the exposure came at Valentine's Day or the exposure came at Christmas. And so if that's your case, where it was on your birthday you found out something, we just want to acknowledge that adds another layer of complexity, because you have what the day is supposed to be, and you now have what you associate the day with this new information, and it makes sense that that's not going to be an easy day to navigate.
At least for a while, I would say. And again, the while for me means until such time is hopefully you connect to a journey of finding meaning in the pain. And when you begin to find meaning in the pain and you begin to see the changes that are coming, the transformation in your own life because of working through something hard with help, it can also become a day of celebration. It's like, it's not that you loved what happened, you loved what you've become. And learning how to switch that so you don't always focus on the negative side of that is, I think, for some people very hard, because their tendencies tend to be negative. But like in your case, Randy, I know you're a very positive person about a lot of things. And we can also train ourselves to look on the positive side eventually of what we really are grateful for, and know that it doesn't have to be connected with, well, so I'm really glad that you had some affairs. It doesn't have to be said that way. It's just, I'm glad I had the opportunity. And I've often said this, of getting into a counseling relationship, I don't know that I ever would have chosen to do that.
Right.
Taken the money, the time, whatever the effort. When I was kind of dumped into it, eventually and fairly quickly, it became something I loved because I could see the difference it was making.
And I think part of it is trust yourself and the time. Hear the invitation, but it doesn't have to be the demand in the moment. I mean, I remember us being at a couples workshop one time, and one of the women clearly said, I'm not ready to hear that this is a place of growth. She just wasn't ready, and she stated that very clearly. And so she was letting us know where she was. There were other women there that were experiencing some of the growth and the transformation. And that's another thing, is just people will be at different places on their journey. And so sometimes if we are in a group, we can start comparing ourselves to other people. Well, they celebrated their anniversary, or they were able to do this. And it's okay to say, and I'm just not there yet. And I often say that yet is the most hopeful word, because it allows us to be where we are, and it also casts the vision that we may not always be there. Along with birthdays and Valentine's Day, it's probably important as we're looking at 2023, for some of you, you may be experiencing for the first time after the explosion or the exposure, maybe you're going to the wedding for the first time, or maybe a child is graduating. Maybe there are these big events that are coming up where you feel compelled that we need to be together as a couple, even though at this point that doesn't necessarily feel safe. Or maybe we are even separated right now, but there's this thing that is happening in our family system that we want to acknowledge. And so is there some guidance or suggestion that you might have for a couple that is separated or in a difficult place, anticipating a family event that they're going to be a part of?
Well, again, there's always choices, so there's no one right way to do that. And for some women, I was just recently talking with a woman who is separated, and she clearly doesn't want to do anything that doesn't feel authentic to herself. So it's her family wedding, and she asked her husband not to attend. So that was a solution for them. I think other people I know have gone on cruises together because they'd already purchased tickets, and they were only a month or so into new discovery of, his addiction. And they just decided they were going to make the best of it and fake their way through the pain of it, if there was any, and come back and start on the work. And I thought, we all have the ability to kind of get through and fake it. We've all done that. If we want to go to that place and do it, we could do that for a few hours or a day or something. So again, you have choices. And I think, being able to talk about them and be intentional about them, you may choose to go. When people ask you how you are, you may both have an answer for how you're going to talk about that. It may be so general that you're not going to get into anything when you're there. That could be fine. I don't know that people would notice whether you're holding hands or not, so you could decide whether you're going to be physical there in terms of touch of any kind. So there are a lot of choices when you do that.
Right. And I would say that there's a difference between being discreet and being deceptive. And so not everybody has to know where you are. If you're going to a family event, you don't have to share with everybody there where you are in your coupleship. And that doesn't mean you're being deceptive. You're just being discreet with that information. I do think it's helpful if you're going to a wedding where the expectation is you will sit together, and maybe there's going to be dancing, that there could just be some clarity about what I'm able to do or what I'm not able to do. And maybe even in the moment we have to decide that. In this moment, am I able to dance with you? Actually, I'm not. Or I'm surprised I can dance with you, But giving yourself permission to talk about that specifically. I would say, let's say that there's an event coming up for your children and the expectation is both of you are going to be there. At this point, you may say, we can't ride together, but we can both be at that experience, that graduation or whatever, our child is going through. And I'm not going to limit you from being there, and I may create some boundaries as far as my interaction with you while you are there. But listening to what you need and getting some support, and the more complicated it is, probably the more support from a community or group, a therapist, you're going to need to be able to navigate it.
One of the things Mark and I used to talk about regularly with couples going into events when it was early on in recovery was thinking about having code words with each other. And I love codes because they're kind of fun anyway to create. And this is assuming you're not separated, but you may still have triggers around any number of things. And a code word would allow you a couple of different codes you will set up. They can be gestures. You make nice gestures to each other.
Yes.
They could be
Appropriate.
words that other people
Mayday,
don't know.
mayday.
But one of them will mean, I'm really triggered right now. Can we step outside and talk for a minute? So it's like, come with me, would you? Because I want to talk with you about something. Another code might represent, I'm feeling like I need to get away for a few minutes, just to know I'm okay, but I'm going to go for a walk and you can stay here. So a code might mean that. You can set up codes for whatever you want, but I think it helps you stay connected as a couple, even though you're moving into an event where there clearly will be triggers that go on, because that's just kind of par for the course. And it helps you almost be a little more lighthearted when they happen, you know?
One of the things I would encourage is for couples who are going into these difficult experiences to have their community alerted and ready to be with them. You know, if you're going to a family wedding, that your community knows, hey, we're going to a family wedding. And one of the codes may be, hey, I'm going to step out and connect with my community because I am getting disoriented. I am kind of getting in chaos and maybe getting knocked out of my truth. And so I just need my community. I'm going to process some things with them, and that will help me reorient into my truth, and I'll be able to come back and engage. So that I'm creating a plan, not just for the circumstance, but my potential needs of what I may need while I'm at this event. But I'm going to be proactive. I've got to set this up beforehand. You know, what's true is I may be able to reach someone in my community if nobody knew I was going to be at a wedding, but it's much more effective if I let all the people in my community know, hey, we're going to a wedding this weekend. Is anybody available from 2 to 4 on Saturday? Because I may need to reach out. And then people can say, absolutely, I'll be available.
Yeah.
But again, that's a new model of self-care. And for couples that are in difficult places, one of the things that can happen is they become over-dependent upon their spouse to create safety or to give them reassurance, and their spouse just may not be able to do it. But a wise community may be able to support you and be with you in a very helpful and redemptive way.
Yeah.
Well, we've kind of talked about the calendar. I'm sure there's much more. One thing I would acknowledge is that a while back, Russ and Susie and I did a podcast on redeeming situations and places.
Yeah.
So if this is something that you've been interested in, that could be a archived podcast that you could go back to. But we just want to acknowledge as we start this new year of 2023 that as you're looking at the calendar, you may already be aware of some challenges, and we invite you to get the support and help that you need to navigate those dates.
Great advice. Great. Well, thanks for being with us again today. Greg, it's great to have you back in town. And Debbie, we always love having you on the podcast. To our loyal listeners and viewers, we thank you for joining us today on the Faithful and True podcast. I would like to invite you to visit faithfulandtrue.com, where you'll find many additional resources. There are some great resources on the website. If you have not discovered it yet and you have a recovery group of men, we have a new free resource that is called The Fight of Your Life. This is an event that Mark Laaser and I used to travel to major churches around the country to present in person, and you'll find it under resources on our website, and you'll find a workbook that you can print out right there for your members to follow along, and then there are 4 video 1-hour sessions that can be viewed. You can stretch it all into a 4-week event, or view it all in one sitting. So we invite you to take a look at that. It's called The Fight of Your Life. And aside from that, as usual, we have our 3-day intensive workshops. The Men's Journey Workshop, the Women's Journey Workshop, and the Couples Journey Workshop. We have the Couples Journey Workshop coming up at the end of this month. here in,
The couples workshop is the end of February.
Yeah.
as I was saying, the couples,
Speaking of the calendar.
I'm going to sooner or later get these dates straight. We have the women's journey workshop at the end of this month, and then at the end of February, we'll have the couples workshop. In the meantime, I'm going to get some sort of therapy myself. I don't know. It might just be memory therapy. I'm not sure. But thank you very much for joining us. We look forward to joining you again soon. May this week be a week for you that's filled with many blessings and with great vision.